Welcome to Pianist Academy. I'm Szczepanek. It's good to see you for another live stream. I just thought it would be wonderful to start with a little tribute to Paulini, who unfortunately passed away. I think that was this past Saturday. So, welcome to everybody. I hope that was a lovely piece to kick the stream off with. Antonio, I'm sorry I did not play Les Adieux, but I did choose some Beethoven for you. So welcome, Antonio. Everybody else who's here, please drop a hello in the chat. And it'll be great to know who's tuning in. And hey, bonus points. Can you name the piece? Piece and movement that we just heard. It's a piece near and dear to me for reasons I haven't really ever talked about on the stream. Hello, OCD King and David. Hello, Bethany. Welcome, Bethany. Any guesses? Hopefully not just guesses. Any comments about what piece and movement that was? Your hint was it was Beethoven. Hello, Rob. Welcome. No guesses. HM, hello, HM. Oh my goodness, I think I'm gonna have to just say what it was. I didn't put it on the screen on purpose so we could talk about it. But we heard for 3 minutes of the third movement of Beethoven's Appassionata. Yes, Bethany. Well, now you heard a little bit more, hopefully. The Appassionata is, that's probably my favorite Beethoven sonata of them all. And so, yeah. Third movement of the Appassionata. And Paulini just like, so intense. I think he really captures the emotion of the movement really, really well. So, okay, everybody, welcome. We're going to kick things off today with, Antonio had sent me a question via email, I don't know, it was a couple days ago, asking about the sound quality of onboard sounds on keyboards and VSTs. For people that don't know, a VST is a virtual instrument. Bethany, for example, we've heard Bethany play on the channel on a VST before. And Bethany, I know you like to use Pianotech. There it is. And Pianotech has a ton of different sounds. It's an algorithmic VST. Bethany, let us know, since we're going to talk about VSTs, do you have a favorite patch in Pianotech, or do you have a couple that you gravitate toward? Because there are like thousands, I think. Pianotech 7, awesome. And Antonio had mentioned that he was playing on his Roland. I cannot remember the number offhand, Antonio, so if you could drop that in the chat. Roland keyboard, and you were comparing the onboard sounds of your keyboard with a library of your own that you created. F10, thanks, Antonio. And you said Pianotech is nice, but is CPU hungry. It is in a certain way. F107. Oh, okay, thanks, Antonio. And you were asking, how much does it cost to get into a keyboard where the onboard sounds are as good as a VST, or some of the best VSTs? Pianotech is, as Bethany said, she usually uses the Hamburg Steinway. Nice. Pianotech, I think, is CPU hungry because it's all algorithmic, and so Pianotech doesn't use any samples of a real instrument. It uses mathematical equations to create sound waves modeled on real instruments. And so you can actually, that's how they cram a tremendous amount of algorithms and tones, piano tones, into a relatively small package. But yes, it can be a little CPU hungry because of the demands to run all of those equations in the background. So that's an algorithmic VST. Now, on the flip side of that, we have sample libraries, which are also called VSTs. And sample libraries are, I usually play sample libraries when I'm playing a keyboard. My favorites are the Ravenscroft 275, I think it is, by VI Labs, for like a really bright, punchy tone. That one's great. Also by VI Labs, if you want an upright, the Modern U is wonderful. So a sample library is a real instrument was brought into usually a recording studio or a concert hall They brought a whole team of engineers in and literally took sound samples of every note on the piano, played in probably more combinations and varieties than you could possibly imagine. And then those are mathematically triggered and sometimes mingled together in the background of the software to create the sound that you hear when you play a single note on a keyboard. The difference is it's triggering real audio that was captured from a real instrument in a real space, including all of the perhaps negatives of the space and of the instrument. For example, I have been looking for a wonderful Steinway library because I don't own one that I really like. And I came across one, I think it was by Embertone. Is anybody familiar with the library by Embertone? It's a New York Steinway. And I was listening to it and I thought, oh, this is magical. It's so warm. It really captures the New York sound that I don't have available to me. And then I listened to some more, hello, Julio. I listened to some more samples of that library, and there are a few unisons that were recorded out of tune. And immediately I was like, no way. Because that's not going to be changed. Every recording I'd make with that library would have the same unisons that are the same amount out of tune. That was too bad. For me, that's not character. It's just not in tune. So going back to my favorite libraries, and then we're going to take a look at, we're actually going to take a listen. I pulled some recordings of some keyboards off, and we're going to discuss that a little bit. Antonio, I've not tried the Roland Pure Acoustic. I have not. So a couple other my favorite libraries. I record almost everything on my other channel with Garriton's model of the Yamaha CFX that was recorded in Abbey Road Studios. I love that piano, and I love that it was mic'd more distantly and in a big space, so it sounds much more like how you would typically hear a classical recording, a classical piano. And one other one, Noir by Native Instruments, if I want a really warm sound. So those are my four. VI Labs has two of my favorite four, the Ravenscroft 275 and the Modern U for an upright. Then the Garriton CFX, recorded in Abbey Road, and Noir by Native Instruments. I have been dying to buy a library from Vienna Symphonic Library, VSL. And every time they release a new library, there's something about it that I don't love that sounds fake to me, and it keeps me from buying it. So, like, they have at least one, maybe two now, Fazioli libraries that I would love them. But I can still hear that they're fake and that it's not a real instrument. Whereas those other four do, I think, the best job of masking the fact that you're actually playing on a keyboard. I don't think W.S. Jade is here, but I'm going to call her out for a second because sometimes we're kind of friends and we talk on Facebook once in a while. She tunes into streams. I'm releasing a new EP, side note, and in a couple months I'm releasing a new EP, and it's all transcriptions of my classical, it's all classical transcriptions, let's say. Some from opera, some from symphonic stuff. And I recorded all of it with the Garriton CFX. And I ended up sending stuff to her, and I asked her what she thought of the piano sound. And she asked me where I recorded it, because it was so good, she thought it was on a real instrument. And I got to say, gotcha. That actually, I was playing on a keyboard the whole time. Crazy. C Drive, thanks for commenting. You say you run Pianotech 8, and you like the Bechstein. Oh, very nice, very nice. And you have a Kawai MIDI controller. Very nice. And Antonio, you said you like Pianotech 8, the Petrov. Okay, so this is wonderful. Let's jump over. I pulled a couple recordings off the internet of some of the top keyboards that are available to purchase. So we're going to hear a couple stage pianos, and we're going to talk a little bit about the tone, and we can comment in the chat about it. And then we're going to hear two of the super high-end like digital instruments for home that are like, for example, the Yamaha Avant Grand. So an instrument that actually like has a soundboard and has speakers attached to it, and it it supposedly recreates the sound of playing a real piano without any of the strings or vibration or any of that. So it's all done with an onboard sound. It's one thing to hear it in the room while you play. It's another thing to hear what it sounds like via speakers or via headphones. So we're going to listen to 4 things and then have a quick chat about those. So let me cue those up. We're going to start with what I consider my favorite keyboard. I don't own one yet, but it's on my list, and that is the Nord Grand. And they just released the Nord Grand 2. So, hello, Sir Wolseley. So I'm going to start off by listening to the Nord Grand, just the piano. I couldn't find like a really cool performance, but I think this is good enough to give us an idea of what it sounds like. So. Okay. Any quick thoughts on that? Type them in the chat for us. Yeah, love to hear. That one is my favorite onboard piano sound I think I've ever heard on any keyboard ever. It's for some people it's missing some of the really, really deep low end, but I find most of the time when you're making a recording and you're releasing a recording, all of that gets cut anyway. So very rarely do you actually hear any of that on a commercially released track. Antonio says it needs outside speakers. Yes. That's going to be the same problem we're going to have with the next example I play for you also. So the Nord Grand, it actually, interestingly, uses an key action designed by Kawai. That's in Kawai's flagship stage piano. They kind of imported, if you will, that action from Kawai, and then the rest of the electronics are Nord. And so I think the sound, the tone is so good. Any thoughts from anybody about that? It's a $5,000 keyboard that, like Antonio says, doesn't have speakers. So the feel, I think, is awesome. The sound, after you get it plugged in, is unbeatable for a keyboard. It's very expensive. And it's pretty much considered the top of the line for stage pianos. Stage pianos are a line of keyboards that are always going to, they're never going to have onboard speakers. They're always meant to be plugged in to some other system. Yes. Yeah, Bethany, you said yours was not that expensive. My keyboard was not either. But I've played the Nord Grand at the NAMM show, the trade show that happens every January in California, and it's so nice. So nice. I would love to own one. Let's move over to the second example. This might be a company that you're not as familiar with. Julio, awesome. I'm just reading your comment, Julio. And hey, Nancy, you know what? So that's what we started talking about with VSTs, if you were here, because I didn't see you chime in earlier. But if you were here, anytime you can use any keyboard and run it through a VST on your computer and make it sound like the most amazing thing ever. There are some YouTube channels out there that use like a Yamaha P115, which is like a $600 or $700 keyboard. And you run it through your favorite sample library and you've got a brilliant sound. The only thing missing is the quality of the action is going to get better as you go up in price. But that's one really cool thing about all these keyboards that have MIDI control. So, Antonio, you said my Kawai is top notch. You have never heard, ever, the sounds from my Kawai digital, because I always use a VST. I actually hate the sounds on my Kawai digital. But mine is also it's like 15 years old. So things have come a long way in that time. Let's jump over to the next example. This is from a company called Decibel, and Decibel keyboards are made in Italy. Interesting. And we're going to take a listen to the Vivo S10, which is their premier top of the line. It's, I think, a little bit less expensive than the Nord Grand. And let's take a listen to that. So there we go. There's a Decibel. This is another high-end competitor of Nord, and let's say any of the top-tier flagship stage pianos. There are some differences in the tonal quality between the Nord Grand and what we just heard. C drive, yes. I know. So I picked these two for stage pianos, and they're actually going to get more expensive from here because Antonio's question was about how close can you get with an onboard sound from a keyboard to a VST that you purchase separately. And those two, even though we're going to listen to some more expensive ones next, I think those two are by far the best. And I don't think they're sample libraries that are on the keyboard. I think they're algorithmic based. I am not aware of a keyboard that comes close with an onboard sound to those two. So you're talking $4,000 to $5,000. For most people, that's an insane amount of money to spend on a keyboard. So I totally get that. Sir Wolseley, you said those high notes were strange. Yeah, that was interesting. They're a little almost like muted. Yeah, so interesting. They don't ring out as much as you might expect them to. Some people might really like that. Some others might not. So let's compare those two to like what we were talking about before, a Yamaha P115, which is a keyboard that's definitely under $1,000. So let's say it's I don't know, the modern equivalent might be $700, $800. Pair that with the Garriton Yamaha CFX library that we talked about at the beginning of the stream, which I think is, the full version is like under $200 for that. The light version, which still sounds great, is I think $100 or $99. And you can have a good keyboard and a fantastic library for under $1,000. That is actually part of the reason why I haven't upgraded my own keyboard in 15 years, because I never use the onboard sounds. The action feels great. I just update my sample libraries. Let's take a quick turn into some of the most expensive, not the super high end, but the next two that we're going to listen to are about $10,000 a piece. And I think you're actually going to be surprised by what they sound like. Those are in a different video, so let me cue that up. Okay, here we go. We're going to change this over. The first one we're listening to is a Kawai NV10. So this is a $10,000 imitation of a real piano. It's got a big cabinet. It's got speakers all over it. It has a handful of sounds. Let's take a listen. Okay. So, see, we've got some mixed opinions already. So, C Drive said, your dream piano. Bethany said, sounds very nice. Sir Wolseley said, you don't like the sound of it. And Antonio, you said you love Stu except for his short. Awesome. Yeah, personal preference. Does it actually sound better than what we just listened to, the two examples before, for twice the money? I mean, at this point, $10,000, you could buy a really nice used baby grand for that much money. Like, you'd have to spend money maintaining it and doing other things, but that's a lot of money. So is it really worth it? For some people, it might be, especially if you don't want to have take care of the maintenance on the instrument. One thing that you can't tell from just listening to the video is that the pivot length, which is the length of key that they're actually using inside the keyboard, the pivot length is among the longest of any digital that's made. And so it really feels like playing a concert grand when you play it. For those of you that don't know, keys, the actual key that starts here on a grand piano and goes into the instrument, the shorter the grand piano is, like a baby grand that's 5.5 feet or a little at the top end of 5 feet, has shorter keys, and the action is all placed much closer to the edge of the key. So it only goes into the piano so far. The longer the instrument gets, we normally think of longer strings, longer soundboard, bigger soundboard, so more resonance, right? But the thing that you never see, that you only feel when you get a chance to play a really nice concert grand, is that the keys get much longer. And then the point at which the hammer strikes the string is also different, so you get better harmonics, let's say. That's a really, really huge difference between a baby grand and a concert grand. And both of these pianos that we're going to listen to next model that longer pivot length. But the Kawai does a really nice job. It's one of the longest, so it feels really, really good, and it feels like you have a lot of control. Let's jump over and listen to the other one, which is the Yamaha N1X. Okay, here we go.
Now to the Yamaha.
Okay, what do we think of that one in comparison to everything we've heard so far today? Antonio says you heard some complaints about the N1X action. It has a shorter pivot length, so it feels like a baby grand to play. So that is that's a personal thing. If you like that short pivot length, fine. But if you don't and you're looking for something really that has more control, then you might not love that. But in particular about the tone. And hopefully all these 4 examples will stay up and visible on the video. Hopefully there aren't any copyright things that force me to take them down or mute them. But then you can go back and just kind of side by side compare. And if my personal opinion is that the Dexibel that we heard second is the least expensive of the 4, and I would happily play that anywhere. And if I wanted to spend the extra $1,000, the Nord Grand is my absolute favorite sound. I still don't think it's as realistic as a good sample library. And I think that's the big thing we can take away from this, is that no matter how expensive the keyboard gets, they are not using the computer technology in the keyboards to be able to load massive sample libraries in and trigger them. And so the sound is still, it's good, but it's still not as good as having a library of 300 gigabytes of sound waves, wave data, that you trigger as you play. Yes, and Antonio, I agree with that. The sound is good, but onboard sound grows old soon, especially if there are a lot of people that like the product. You'll hear that sound a lot in a lot of stuff, either in recordings or like, for example, I used to, when I lived in Arizona, in Phoenix, I used to, a couple Sunday afternoons a year, I would go to brunch and there would be live jazz. So fun. Wintertime usually, because it was always outside in Phoenix, so it would be like 70 degrees and beautiful. And the keyboard players always had Nord pianos. And so I immediately assigned the Nord sound to jazz played at this particular like venue, if you will. And it sounds really good. But for me, like Nord instantly brings back those memories, and no other company does. So I think that also goes along with what Antonio said. Like, you start to attribute one very specific thing to an onboard sound. Bethany, you said onboard, do you mean sound built into the keyboard? Yes. Yes. So whatever, like the main piano sound that loads up when the keyboard is turned on, that's usually the tone that the developers have spent the most time honing. And that's the tone that's going to get used most often. Yes, so Antonio said, moral of the story, and better invest in a good computer that can handle huge libraries. If you're into finding the best possible tone, even regardless of the money, the best possible tone I think you're going to find by using a VST with the keyboard. So a VST on a computer paired with your keyboard. And then, like I said earlier, the big pro of that is that you can keep your keyboard around forever, for as long as it lasts, which hopefully is a good long time, and you can always update the sounds, and you can always get the next greatest thing as long as your computer can handle it. Yeah, I think that's good. Antonio, I hope that answered the question you sent me. I will always choose, unless I'm playing on a keyboard out of the house, which I've done once or twice, maybe twice. Usually I'm playing an acoustic instrument. There was one time I played on live on TV in the studio. They didn't have a piano in the TV studio, so I brought my keyboard and used the onboard sounds. That was one time, I think, of two in the last 2 decades that I did that. The whole rest of the time I play my keyboard, I'm always using a VST. So I hope that, especially I know a lot of you play keyboards at home and you practice on them, and that's your main instrument. I think it could be eye-opening to go check out some of the other sample libraries. And if you can figure out, it's easier today than ever to figure out the connectivity between a keyboard and a computer. And Nancy, who said that's why her husband has kept his ancient iPad, because it has his music library. Yes. So C Drive, you said you tried to play your P125 with, I think that's Piano Tech, right? And the sound was tinny and you hated the action. That's still the best reason to upgrade from one of the like entry or mid-level keyboards to something nicer is purely for the action. And that's part of the reason that I am still playing my Kawai MP8 from 15 years ago. It has a grand piano action. It was one of the first keyboards to have a grand piano action in it. And I made that investment a long time ago. Still play it today. Still works great. Bethany, you said you're having some clicking on your Kawai. If I'm a student, the action on my keyboard still works great. And I go to town on it. Like, I don't hold back playing. And it still works. Some of you that have seen my videos, I think you've seen when I play my Kawai, it's on a stand and the whole stand shakes like this because I play so hard. Let's see. So Antonio, you said, yes, you said what I thought, which I'm not sure is good for you. Or it's very good for you, Antonio. And Julio says, are there a lot of cons to buying a used acoustic piano? It's definitely better to buy a brand new one, but they're very costly. That really depends. There's a lot to know about new pianos and used pianos. If you're to really make like a great investment, there are a ton of wonderful used instruments that are available. You can go on, if you want to look online for what's available, go to pianomart.com and you can find listings. These are for sale by owner pianos. You can search by brand, you can search by size, you can search grands, you can search uprights. Last time I looked, I think there's some like 12,000 or 13,000 pianos for sale on there. It's incredible. So, to quickly answer your question, Julio, new pianos aren't actually always even better than used pianos because a lot of new pianos still need a little bit of time to break in. And so even though most new pianos these days, they get played in the factory by a machine to help break them in and make sure the tuning is stable and a lot of stuff, get the hammers, start the voicing process, which partly happens from playing on the instrument. So even though the factory does that for a new instrument, it usually changes, sometimes pretty considerably within the first year or two, as you play it at home. Also, and this is, I think, a really cool thing, and there's a whole lot of ways it connects to instrument manufacturing, not just piano, but also violin manufacturing. Yamaha, they're on their newest CFX Concert Grand design, they've incorporating this technology that simulates something like 100 years of sound waves resonating through the wooden components in the instrument. Because as sound resonates wood, the molecular construction of the wood actually changes. And the most common place that you usually hear about, that I've heard about this anyway, is in violin manufacture and playing old instruments, old string instruments. I used to know people that would talk about how a good friend of mine in college had nerve damage in her elbow. I can't remember. It was some kind of accident, and it was her bow elbow, and she couldn't play for a long time. And her violin sat in its case for 8 to 12 months. And when it came out of the case, it didn't sound like it used to, because it almost like the instrument died, because sound wasn't vibrating the wood in the instrument anymore. Super interesting. And apparently she talked to her professor about it, and it was like super common that happens. And then it takes a lot of playing, but the instrument, you can like bring it back to life by playing it a lot. And you can get it to respond like it used to if you play it a lot. And the same thing happens with every instrument that is made out of wood, especially every instrument where the soundboard is wood. I think that's every string instrument for sure, right? So the molecular composition actually changes, and Yamaha is doing this thing where they can create that in the lab, apparently. And so their new CFX, which I got to play a year or two ago, sounds a lot warmer right out of the factory than their previous one. And they're claiming a lot of it has to do with this new technology they're packing into pianos. Okay, all that said, if you look for an old piano, especially one that has been loved and cared for and played, you can get some really great instruments like Steinways and Mason & Hamlin's from the turn of the century are usually considered two of the best pianos ever made, between around 1900 and 1930 for the two brands. And you can find those actually they're still expensive, but they're way less expensive than a new Steinway. And most concert artists would say that they outperform a new Steinway. Even the Mason and Hamlins, the old Mason and Hamlins, which, by the way, when Rachmaninoff came over to the United States for the first time, I'm very, very sure that he premiered his second piano concerto on a Mason and Hamlin 9-foot grand, not on a Steinway. And Bethany says, yeah, your church has a 100-year-old Mason and Hamlin that your dad worked on, and it's great to play. Yeah. One of my private students has a Mason and Hamlin from 1920 that's been rebuilt, and sounds great. Sounds great. So there are some really, really great pianos to be had that are used, and they're a fraction of the cost of buying something new. Yes, Nancy, you said you had a Steinway upright for a while in 1910. That is really cool. My main professor from when I was studying I think his is an 1899 or an 1898 Steinway that he's had in the family. His family bought it when it was new. I mean, talk about amazing. That was the piano that he learned on when he was a kid, and he still has it in his house. He has never purchased a piano in his entire life. Really, really cool. So, Julio, to sum up that question, you can find some really great deals on used instruments. I'll give you a quick example. Like my piano, which is a Kawai RX5, if you were to find one of these available today, it would be less than 50%. It would be about 60 to 70% less than a new one of these. And you hear my piano all the time. It's 25 years old. It sounds good. So, yeah. There you go. Any other follow-up questions about pianos, sample libraries, VSTs, all of that before we move on? I haven't seen Rhodsey pop in. Rhodsey, are you here? Because the next step is to listen to a new composition by Rhodsey. I think that's fun. I love talking about instruments and all kinds of different eras, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. So obviously, it's even more fun if you get to go play them. But yeah, it could be great. Digital or silent, Sir Wolsey says. I would pick digital over a silent grand. I've heard complaints from some people about how the silent feature changes the way the action plays, even when it's not enabled, in ways that aren't usually liked. So, yeah, I would always choose to have a separate digital, either a digital only, or if I'm going to have two, an acoustic and a digital, I'll keep them separate, and I won't try to do both with one piano. Yes, yeah, Julio, yeah. It is super interesting. We never think about that, but, you know, sound are waves, and the waves permeate everything. Yeah, it's very interesting. Why don't we jump over and we're going to listen to a Nocturne by Rhodsey. Hopefully he's here, because we're going to have some nice stuff to chat about. And so he's sent over a video of, Antonio, yeah, I have listened to the sample I sent you of your library. Yes. It sounds pretty good, Antonio. It's there's I think a little bit of an issue with the velocity table, because the range from a key strike to key strike is sometimes really massive from a loud tone to a soft tone. There's a way bigger difference, and especially compared to the Roland sound that you sent me, the difference is enormous. And I don't think that's because the Roland is not well designed. I would think that would be really dialed in for loud playing and soft playing. So that's something I would take a look at, is making sure that the velocities are well matched. Yeah. Let me cue up Rhodsey's Nocturne. He sent over a video. It's a computer playthrough of his piece, but with the score. So we'll all be able to follow along, and we'll dive in and talk a little bit about compositionally where we can go. So let me cue that up. Okay, here we go. All right. I don't think Rhodsey is here, but let's give him a round of applause. Okay. I know, Sir Woolsey. First thing, Rhodsey, if you could possibly send in a little bit of you playing some of your music, that would be great. For a couple reasons. But it's always nice to hear a person rather than a computer. So yeah, just consider that. Sir Woolsey, you said you loved it. Awesome. Bethany, yes, very nice. Nice applause from Nancy. Wonderful. Sir Woolsey said the last part is very nice. Do you mean like the last 8 measures or so? Is that the bit we're talking about? I like the last 8 measures. The bass drop. Yes. We get this. It almost sounds like the opening of the Polonaise Fantasy. That is very nice, Rhodsey. I do have the music that I'll put up here in a bit. So I think most of my comments are going to be about the A section. I'll say quickly, because I'm not going to get here, I know otherwise, that the allegro that begins is probably one of my favorite bits of the piece that you've written here. So that begins at the bottom of this page. I cannot play it as fast as that recording was. I think there's a lot of neat stuff going on there. And I like the way that you've tied together the theme from the beginning of the piece into this very different mood. That's really great. I also really like, I think you did it on purpose, here and starting in measure 48, the end of measure 48, right around here. We have these little phrases of 7 notes there, with a little pause and octaves between the hands. And then these continue to be offset a little bit at times. So like here it happens on beat 2, the octave I'm talking about. And now we have another 1, 2, 4, 7 notes. Now the octave is offset by a 16th note. Another 7 notes and offset again by the same amount. Then another 7 and now it's offset again. Another 8th note in. I think that's really interesting. And you've done something really cool with repeating the same material with just a little bit of variation. So 1 and 1 and 2. That's neat, and I think it has a great effect. Let's go back to the beginning. I think, and tell me if you agree with me, people that are here, when you think of Nocturne, what is the first thing that comes to mind for everybody? What kind of piece are we expecting? Because Nocturne was originated by, Sir Woolsey said easy. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't necessarily agree with easy, Sir Woolsey. Nocturnes can be challenging in a lot of ways. Edith said more calm. Sir Woolsey said night music. Edith said more introspective. I think especially if we look at where the Nocturne originated with John Field, Nocturnes were all, the piano version of the Nocturne, I should say. Nocturnes were all very calm, and they usually did not go into a contrasting B section or a C, anything like that. We had a beautiful melody presented. Bethany says broken arpeggios in the left hand. Very often, broken arpeggios in the left hand. Some of the Chopin nocturnes, Chopin's really changed the Nocturne and made it into, I think, what we would more typically think of when we think Nocturne, which is still beautiful soaring melody a lot of the time. Single line in the right hand many times. Sometimes a little duet with a couple parts. And then, like Bethany said, broken arpeggios and sometimes chord movement. For example, right? If I pulled up the music, I could play that better. But that piece, that's Nocturne E flat. It is usually single note or octave in the bass, followed by triads in the top, single note melody in the right hand. Right? Still singing and lovely. And then, of course, in some of the nocturnes, we get a more aggressive or borderline violent middle section that really breaks up the dreamlike quality of the rest of the nocturne. But that's in some and not all of the nocturnes. So that's the first thing, Rhodsey, is that you've given this piece the title of Nocturne. And I think we could, yes, Sir Wolsey, 27 number 1. That's one of them that I'm thinking of. I think if you slow the tempo down, and even if we don't change any of the notes, if the tempo is just slower and not in cut time, but just in 4 still with the same tempo marking of andantino cantabile, then there, sorry. That immediately already sounds more nocturne-like because we've slowed that tempo down and we're allowing time for the melody to sing and soar more, right? So that'd be the first thing. We don't need to rush through the opening section. So if we change that, I really think it could all be fixed if we just change that from cut time to 4/4 instead. Keep the same tempo marking, because cut time means we're counting 2 beats per bar. And if we're counting 2 beats at andantino, it becomes twice as fast, which is very quick. Okay, next thing. Oh, just a quick compositional thing, Rhodsey. This chord that you've written here in the middle of measure 2 is technically a C, an E sharp, and a G sharp. So if we respell that correctly, we have, it's just a triad in root position with an E sharp. That's really important because in the key of F sharp minor, F sharp is the 1 chord. The 5 chord is C sharp major, C sharp or C sharp 7, right? So really what you've done here is you've written a C sharp major chord, which is the 5, but it hasn't been spelled that way. It's been spelled with an F instead, which really confuses how it's functioning, and it makes it more difficult to read than what it actually is, because we're not used to reading F, that second of F natural to G sharp feels like a third, because what you've written is an augmented second. Anyway, it is an important thing. It doesn't change the tone, but it's an important thing for being able to sight read this more easily. And also, it's going to be a part of the theme of what we talk about a little bit more, which is, how is our harmony functioning? So, from the beginning, we have the 1 chord, and then brief movement to 5/7. Wonderful. Super, super. Go back to 1. Even this is really nice. The E sharp paired with F sharp. It sounds like a dissonance. It sounds like a suspension almost that will resolve up. Now, the thing that you've done, and I get why you've done it, you have, let's say, transposed or crossed E sharps between the hands. And also what that ends up doing is this is like a suspension. It's sus. And then the next note is the release. Oh, by the way, Dith, I'm sorry. Dith, if you have a question, let me know. A quick side note. What is this? I just heard the spicy being used to like describe everything. This probably shows how old I am. But what is with people using spicy to say that something is, I don't know, everything? Cool, intense, I don't know, it's spicy. I'm going to use that. Rhodsey, your use of E sharp is spicy. Yeah, Dith, E sharp makes your brain hurt. Yeah, I get that. Because of the key we're in, it is technically correct. Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about the groovy, man, Nancy said. Nice. Let's talk a little bit about this crossing of the E sharp from the melody into the left hand. So now we have, it is technically the 5 chord again, and this is spelled the way this one should have been spelled. So that's good. But when you juxtapose this against suspension release, what we get is the hint of a suspension that doesn't release and becomes quite dissonant, actually, because now we're playing a C sharp major chord with the 4th tone in it. And so it confuses us, I think, actually quite a lot. Whereas, let's say I continue the movement that you started here, and we ascend to the next inversion of F sharp minor. I'll have to leave off the top note because it's in the right hand. So, and then this, I know you mean this as an E, an E natural. That really needs to be marked as E natural. It played back on the computer as E natural, but technically it reads E sharp on the score. So you want to mark a natural there. Okay, so if we eliminate this and we write either just the next inversion of F sharp, that would be great, or 2 inversions up that mimic what happened in the previous bar. That, all of a sudden, now we get the suspension and the release that we expect. And it's very satisfying. And then if you want to continue to show a new direction for the harmony to go with this last chord, that would be great. I'm going to jump over and answer Dith's question. Yeah, Dith, great question. And then we'll come back to the piece. Okay, so augmented. Let's talk about intervals. We have qualities of interval, just like we have qualities of chord. So intervals, we typically talk about minor intervals and major intervals, right? And so if we're looking at just C as our starting point, we have from C to D is a major second. From C to D flat is a minor second. We should be pretty familiar with those two, major and minor. Now, what if we take a major interval and we want to make it bigger? We take D and we write D sharp. Now, if you played this as C to D sharp, it would be an augmented second. This is the confusing part. If you take the same 2 notes and we write them C and E flat, it's a minor third. So sometimes augmented appears for a particular reason, and in this case, I can't remember where I was talking about that, but I think it's a little bit of a mistake. Because an augmented second, it was F natural to G sharp, An augmented second reads exactly, it sounds exactly the same as a minor third. And there are going to be relatively few times that we're actually going to use an augmented second. And Julio, yes, the rhythmic word conventions in England and in Europe are different than they are in the States. Until I actually never even ran into those other terms until I was well out of university. I do not know the history behind them. I'm sorry I can't answer that better. If one of these days, when Fred Viner is back on a stream, because he pops in once in a while. We can ask him about that. I'm sure he would know. Yeah. So yes, dith, yeah, the F natural to G sharp. That is an augmented second. I'll show you that over here as well. We had this F natural to G sharp. And it's all in the way that it's notated on paper. If it's F natural to A flat, it's a minor third. If it's F natural to G sharp, it's an augmented second. Why is that important? Because the notation that we have on paper tells us the function of the harmony. So it's really important to show a minor third and not an augmented second, because a minor third will tell us something different, especially if it's a part of a triad. And immediately it tells us, the more you get to know notation, the more it tells you sooner, right? And also for sight reading purposes, we've talked about this recently, either in the last stream or the one before. We always want to get used to reading patterns on the page, right? I went into a whole thing about that in probably the last stream. And those patterns are groups of notes and interval relationships that we commonly see. So if we go back to the page and we look at the chord that is in yellow now, that becomes far more difficult to sight read because that shape almost never exists in the rest of music notation. If we see a second on the top of a fifth, we're going to assume it's going to sound like this or like this. And that feels a certain way to play, right? And as soon as it's written, as soon as it's written correctly, like a triad, same pitches, but it looks now like something that we're very used to seeing, right? It also, because of that E sharp, tells us that this is a 5/7 chord. When it's F natural, it is a harmony that, in fact, doesn't exist, really. It would have no functional name. So, okay. Let's go back to this piece. That was a great question, Div. Yeah. Okay. So let me play these two bars for us now with this change so that we really feel the melodic suspension and release and we don't change the chord early. Right. Now, this last chord that you've written, Rhodsey, I'm going to get rid of all this because we're done talking about it now. The last chord of bar 3, which would be this one, there it is, you have implied a very particular harmony. What you've implied is this harmony with an A sharp, which would be F sharp dominant 7. F sharp, this would become a secondary dominant chord, which is supposed to resolve down by 5th. So, because if you instead wrote this top note as E sharp, and this was truly a major 7, either that chord, that would be a totally different function. But because it's E natural, and you intend E natural, even though it's not written here like that, as soon as that E natural creeps in, we hear, and Bethany said it wants to go to B minor. Spot on perfect. That's where it wants to go. So, because of that, the movement that you've created, which is hovering through now F sharp minor, it ends up not making as much sense as it could to the listener, because this makes the ear wants resolution there. Instinctively, it wants that. And you don't give it to us. The interesting thing is, if you do give it to us on the next beat, and we do get B minor, I'll just write the triad for us, okay, with an F sharp. If we do get B minor, I'm going to play in a different voicing. It still works. I didn't change any of the melody. Even the first 2 beats can still work as B minor. And I think it sounds more musically fulfilling that way. Yeah? And then that would be a logical place to go, would be D major. Because now we're kind of hovering around, what would this be? 6, yeah. So just a major 7 built on the 6th scale degree, which would be a major 6. So then we would get a diatonic harmony that works really well. So what do we have here? So I'm taking a lot of what you've put. Here you came really close to D major. You made it D minor. And then you do resolve to a 5 chord, which is great. So I think these are a couple harmonic suggestions for you to incorporate right away into this main motif, which by itself, let me actually play that for everybody. The C sharp is not included, so just starting on F, 2, 3. If we call that the end of a phrase, that's quite nice. If we add this partially reharmonized version, I think that sounds really satisfying. We didn't change our melody one bit. We have just eliminated a little bit of the harmonic confusion about where we're going and what we're doing. And then when we imply a particular chord, we're making sure that we resolve to that particular chord, right? So when we imply a secondary dominant, we go where we expect to go. This would end up being an augmented 6, I believe, on D, because resolving outward. Even if we resolve to the 6/4, cool. Any questions from anybody here so far? Because Rhodsey is not here to chime in with comments or thoughts. As far as the rest of this, I really like the opening section, Rhodsey. And when we leave it, I think you do a pretty good job of writing some variation. I think the variations get a little too intense too quickly. You add a lot of notes, when really, if we were going to come back to the A at the end of the piece, that could have the most variation. And right now, it's on the very second statement of the melody that there's a lot. It's we almost don't even get the original melody anymore on the second time through. Dith, you could still say, do you like it or do you not like it? Or, you can have an emotion about it, or does it cause you to feel a certain way when you hear it? And those are perfectly valid. So Rhodsey, I wouldn't go quite so far with the variation so quickly. And then, as soon as you find yourself wanting to write more notes, we didn't go into the B section very much, but all of a sudden, we have, looking at the last line here, we have that, which is a combination of some scales, and we have this right? The left hand makes a lot of sense. That's actually quite Nocturne-like. The right hand, I would say, it's not very singable, and I don't feel a good reason to add all of that movement at this point in the piece. It just seems like there is a lot that we kind of explode into this fast running passage. And because it's not singable, I'm not connecting really an emotion with it. So I'm not sure exactly what it is that you're trying to say with the notes. I don't think anything in the left hand really needs to be changed. That's interesting. You added some nice color in there. But Rhodsey, because we know how you like to improvise, that I would, anytime you catch yourself starting to play running passages that are scalar, I would ask yourself, why? Why is it there? Why are you putting it there? And why are you writing the notes down? And give yourself a test. One, is it truly singable? Is it memorable? Right? Those two, they don't have to go together, but I think they're really related. Do we ever want to write something that's not memorable? Probably not, especially in a short piece. Now, I doubt if we were listening to a Beethoven symphony or something, we're not going to be able to sing back every measure of the symphony. They're not, but that's a 30-minute work. If we're talking about a short work, a nocturne, a piece that stands alone, and we take a whole musical journey in like 5 minutes. I don't think there are any measures that can be kind of filler, if you will, where there isn't. They're not serving as great of a purpose as everything around them. So anytime you catch yourself starting to play a bunch of running passages, just ask why. And is it really serving a purpose in the music? And hopefully the answers they'll either help you hone and refine what you'd like to write, or you'll say, oh, maybe I need to come up with an entirely new idea. Both of those are perfectly good, acceptable. Let's see, Dith, and you said changes very fast from one motif to another. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. And you said feels a little abrupt. I agree. And I think with some choice changes, it wouldn't have to feel that way. So the bones are good. Just a little bit of refining could help us go a long way. So Rhodsey, I hope that helps. Sorry we didn't get to see you today. Thanks for chiming in, Dith and Sir Wolseley. I appreciate it. Great. I think I'm going to call it a day with those comments. There was the next section of this that I was going to go into was a little bit about using microgroups in practice. But I know we have a lot of people that have been here for a while. Do you want to dive into that next? It is to answer a specific question, but that person is for sure not here. They're going to be tuning in later. So we can jump over to answer some other things if there is anything pressing for you that are here. Or if you're interested in what I have to say about microgroups, I'm happy to go there. It probably won't be 30 minutes. It'll be more like 10 to 15. Rhodsey, we just finished your segment. Yes, so Rhodsey, I think we started this around... Rhodsey, I was planning on being done with all of the submissions by an hour into the stream. So we started your stuff maybe 40 minutes ago, Rhodsey. So, Rhodsey, if you want to, feel free. You don't have to stay with us live if you don't want to. You could go back and listen at 1.5x or 2x through what we just did if you want to. Or feel free to stay tuned in. Either one's cool. Did you say microgroups? I'm happy to go with that. Sir Wolseley, yes. So I realize not everybody in the world has changed time zones like we have in the States. In some places, it changes. The time changes at different points. So for me, we do still start at 10. I have a student actually in Istanbul that I have been continuing to miss because they haven't shifted time for the last couple of weeks. So yeah, whatever time this was currently for you, that is where it'll be until you change time or until the States changes back in about 5 months from now. So I know that's confusing. Doesn't help either. Doesn't help people remember what time things happen. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about microgroups. Dith, you said you had a lot of success learning Gillick, the serenade with small groups, even though you don't like doing it. Yes. I'm going to first talk about then the piece that is causing this person, John, issues. We'll start with that, and then maybe we can apply it to some other things as well. So, he's currently working on the infamous of course, Chopin's A minor waltz. So his question was in particular about how in the world to get that bar of arpeggio to match the speed at which you can currently play everything else. And I think he was saying right now he's playing at about 90 beats per minute. So let me dial that in. So here's 90. But when you get to this bar, 21, it's no longer possible to play at 90. Right? So, how can we practice that to make that possible? I think some of you here might already know how to do this. Feel free, drop it in the chat. You can check your work, if you will. Okay, so we're going to divide this bar into a couple different segments. All this is an E major arpeggio over what? 1.5 octaves. So we don't even need to look at the music anymore. It's an E major arpeggio over 2.5 octaves. Sir Wolseley said, you remember there was an answer, but you don't remember the answer. Very good. So first thing, obviously, if we're working on something like this that is a literal use of an arpeggio in root position in a piece of music, first thing you can always do is simply practice your arpeggio. That doesn't have anything to do with microgroups, but just practice your arpeggio. That's going to make this bar better as soon as we take that time and practice it outside of this piece. Secondly, how can we structure small groups within this measure? So, where are the difficult bits? So here's where we start. The first difficult bit is the cross of the hand over the thumb to the next note. So, that it becomes, those first 4 notes becomes a microgroup. So Bethany, I'm using this term microgroup to talk about how we practice in tiny portions of a measure. And sometimes, like what I just wrote on the page, the grouping that we practice does not even correspond to the beaming or to the beat. Actually, many times it won't. So, it's just the first 4 notes of an arpeggio. So if we take a look at that, we're practicing across the thumb transition. Can we practice this microgroup way faster than we need it to be? So if we can do this, can we speed it up incrementally? As fast as you can and still play it cleanly, smoothly, with no tension. right? Also, because this is an arpeggio, we cannot get stuck holding on to the third finger and trying to swing everything around to finger legato to the thumb. Because if we're trying to do that, you can see just how excessive the motion of the arm is. Right? I've called this before doing the chicken dance, when the elbow flies out over and over and over again, because that's the only way we have to connect third finger. If we want to play finger legato, third finger to the thumb cannot reach unless the elbow helps it out. A little bit of that practice is important, but more of our practice time should be spent jumping, because the elbow is not moving, right? So now we're working on two things within our micro group. Within these 4 notes, actually 3 things. We're working on speed, we're working on a little bit of the feeling of finger legato with no pedal, and then put the pedal down and play everything with a jump between 3 and 1. So, all 3 of those things, you'll find that you can only increase the speed so much when you need to finger legato. Okay, we can have much more speed jumping. And we put the pedal down because it's gonna be down in the piece for the whole bar. Right? Okay, next micro group. That's the first one. Second one, we're gonna structure the same way. We're actually gonna start at the note that we left off on previously, and we're gonna go across to the next one. Why is this important? Because the arm is in a different position up an octave than it was down the octave. There we go. So, even though they're the same pitches, practicing it up an octave feels different, takes a slightly different use of our technique to execute that properly. Now we have a new micro group. Now you could make one final one, once again starting on C and going across the measure. So I'm doing these all separate because they overlap on notes. So let's see, here was our first group, and it ended there. Next group started here and ended here. And then the last group. So there are overlapping notes. Okay, that's one set. Now let's talk about another set of micro groups. What if we play so now we're starting in the same place, playing one note further. What is this working on that's different? It's making sure that the hand is in position to play the next set of notes beyond where the thumb plays. So now we have, this feels different, right? Oh, I see we have some interesting talk. Cool. I have not heard of Ray Chen, Bethany, but awesome. Okay. Let's add another group to this. We can just go another step beyond. Okay? And as we practice this, we should be spending quite some time on each one of these. This isn't something that we say, I've done it a few times and we're done. This is, we start with that first one and we work at it. Change your tempo a little bit, change your dynamic a little bit. And we work at it until it's really comfortable. Just that small portion of the bar, right? Here's a really awesome tool to use when we're thinking about grouping things like this. The most important one is the one that I showed you first, and that's where we go across either a big transition, anything that's the most difficult place bit to accomplish. We're working on speed here. We need to make it faster. The difficult transition is where the thumb tucks underneath the hand. But we can still practice that in a lot of other ways. In fact, you could start on any note of the bar or any note of the arpeggio, and we can still practice in microgroups. That would be also really useful, especially if here, my second finger is, I'm not prepping my thumb to go anywhere. So, right? There's another group. So, and then 3-1. Going back to the first one, second one, third one. Can we articulate all of those? What other pieces? That's a great summation of, I think, how we should work on a bar like this. Followed up with the fact that when we play the bar musically, we're not keeping perfect time. This isn't, it's not like that. There's a pause, and there's a little bit of a hanging at the top. Right? What other pieces is everybody here working on? Because I can probably help guide some of this as well in some other pieces, which I think would be helpful for everybody to see how we can apply the same structure in practice to a lot of different stuff. Julio, you asked if I have any students here on the chat, or have you had ones who have attended? Yes. There are a couple. I haven't seen any today, but there are a couple of my students that tune in regularly, or pretty regularly. So, Dith, you said A Legend and the Serenade by Gillick. Bethany, Jess. So Jess is here. Jess is one of my students. Let's see, Dith's F major sonatina by Beethoven. Bethany, I have no idea. I have never heard that piece before. Sir Woolsey, bar 46 and 47 of the Nocturne. Let's see what that is. $45, $46. Are you including, Sir Woolsey, are you including bar 45? Or do you find 45 is easier? I think we're gonna go with this one. We'll talk about this little example, and then we can move on to just open questions. Okay, so you said 45 is a little easier. So, showing everybody what we're talking about. This is Chopin's Nocturne, Opus 27, number 1. If I give you a little bit of a start in 41 and play some of that for you. So that's what we're talking about. Okay. The fingering that is in the score here is not what I typically use. So, okay, Sir Woolsey, do you have your score handy? Because I'd love to know what finger choices you're using. And you said 47 in the right hand is having problems. This? Interesting. Okay, so Woolsey, this isn't really going to be a micro practice thing, but I think I can help you. So, in order to facilitate the beginning of 47, there's simply a rotation of the wrist between the grace note and falling in on the rest of the chord. If I show you that from up here. So it's all played rotate, rotate. Thumb is playing those bottom two notes. And then we do not try, I know your teacher, Sir Woolsey, likes to talk about finger connection. Don't finger connect. So it's jump, jump, jump. Because everything is under pedal. So, jump, jump. So if the challenge is that grace note, we're just dividing the hand. Oh, good. Okay, I just saw your comment. We're dividing the hand between 5 and everything else. And we just fall in with the thumb. The thumb leads the hand down. So you could potentially make microgroups out of this and just play. And so I'm not showing you every different way I'm dividing that up, but if you listen to where the pauses happen, that is where I'm creating a new group. And so sometimes I'm pausing at the beginning. When I pause at the beginning, it's to facilitate that motion in the right hand. Make that the focus. Making sure we release. We go through the rest of the bar. What if that becomes not a problem? Then we play. If we practiced a lot of release, so difficulty is finding the notes. So then take these 2 at a time. Just that. And do it without looking at the score. Absolutely. Most of this, I would say, most of the B section through here, in order to play it well and even close to tempo, it's got to be memorized. And if it can be memorized while we do these tiny little groups, so. Or take the second half of the bar. And we can go through the whole thing. So we can break down each of these into just 2 beats, or a beat and a half, a beat and a third. Just that. And if really truly finding this, navigating through those harmonies, so you have it memorized. Good. So if it's truly finding where the fingers go for all of these chords, I have another tip for you. So one, yes, definitely go faster and play them in short groups. Because we have to challenge the mind to be able to execute it, right? So do it with one hand. And when it's just two notes, we can really focus on the transition that the fingers make from the first chord to the next. And then do from the next chord, second chord. And make sure every time you do this, you're using the same fingers. Absolutely use the same fingers each time. Okay? Push the speed faster than absolutely faster than you'll need to play it, and faster than you think you can possibly play it. So when we slow it down and we realize we have all that time, all of a sudden your brain is going to be like, it's going to be like the choir of angels. And they'll say, oh, there's so much time, and this is so easy now. So easy. And you can focus your attention on the gymnastics the left hand is doing, because that is probably where the vast majority of our attention needs to go when we perform it, is to the arpeggios and the skips. So this, very quick, with the right notes. How about? Not that one. Here we go. Okay, second tip, Sir Woolsey, and this is less about microgroups, but more about, it's just another practice tip. If we really want to feel where the fingers are going, now we're going to actually take the tempo in the opposite direction. We've explored playing it really fast, faster than necessary. Now we're going to take it far slower than necessary, and we're going to make sure that we feel the bottom of the key and take time for each of these. Especially if, can you look down and can we try to imprint two things: how it looks to play and also how it feels. So we have this, and feel the connection to the bottom of the key, and take our time to feel that. Next chord, oh, that was the wrong finger. So now there's a strong mental focus on exactly what the hand is doing. Whereas the other type of practice, the fast practice, is working on building muscle memory and making this like automatic, right? Now we're taking so much time and we're focusing so much that we're trying to imprint the feel and the visual of what this is, combined with not a continued push into the key. We're not bearing down, just feeling the connection to the bottom of the key. I hope that helps, Sir Woolsey. In this, you could even still call this a microgroup in a piece like this, because we're only working a bar and a beat. That's still a really, really short amount of time, right? And you could also add the left hand to this. It doesn't just have to be the right hand. But if you can do both, so we're practicing that down motion and feeling connection. We're also going to practice jumping. Great. I think, unless we have more questions about this particular concept, we can wrap that up. And I'll take some of these other questions that have come in. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, great question, Sir Woolsey. I hope that does help in your practice. Yeah. Okay. Gelzoro, hello. You ask, how far above performance tempo do you usually work a piece? If it's a real challenge and I'm looking for a lot of solidification of the notes and the technique, it depends on how fast it is. It's supposed to be performed, but probably I'd say 10 to 20% faster. If I can achieve 10 to 20% faster, especially if I can achieve that across in a performance, I'll feel really good and really comfortable playing it at my intended tempo. And yeah, so that can be a lot, though. That can be tremendously fast. And for sure, when doing small groups, if it's a couple beats or if it's like 3 or 4 bars at a time, having those at least that fast or maybe even faster. Yeah. But I'd say basic guideline, 10% for sure all the time, 20% if possible for an entire playthrough. And then as the groups get smaller and smaller and smaller, that amount goes up. So that's a great question. Rhodsey, good to see you that you've caught up. Yeah, exactly. 10 to 20% is... if it's an etude and it's blazingly fast already, 5% might be more than enough. 5 or 10 beats per minute faster might be more than enough to absolutely get us to be, when we take that off. The real goal is how fast can we push it so that when we take that tempo off, it feels incredibly comfortable. So, Rhodsey, let's jump back to your piece in just a minute. Let me answer a couple of these other questions. So Dith, you said, how important do you find using a metronome? And your teacher is a dog on a bone about always using one. I dislike using a metronome. Not even all of my students would think that about me, because it really depends. But what's most important is that we have the sense of inner pulse. So the way that I prefer to use a metronome as much as possible is to simply give us a tempo. So for example, when I was looking at, when we were talking about the Chopin waltz, and my student, not my student, but this student that's working on the piece said they were working at approximately 90. I did not play it to 90. I put the metronome on. I checked what 90 was. I know this is 90. And now I can play with that sense of inner pulse. And we keep that inner sense of pulse. Now, the times that I find that it becomes a little bit more necessary is if our inner pulse is not good. If it's flying all over the place, we need something to help us cue into that. But metronome a little bit, but more often I will try to incorporate some other physical movement, like conducting a pattern. Can we conduct a beat pattern, even if it's just 2, 1, 2, 1, 2? And can we feel the pulse very accurately at whatever tempo we choose? And can we keep it there? Can we keep it there only focused on the movement that the pulse creates, right? Another thing, I don't do this as often, but when it needs to happen, especially if it's like an andante, walk. We actually will get up and walk, because a walking tempo is literally something. It's something that we can experience physically. Every step we take, we don't walk in a jerky motion. Most people don't, right? So one foot goes after the other, and it's very consistent. And that is something walking, we know how to do like the back of our hand. We do it all the time. We do it subconsciously. Running is the same thing. It's a little bit harder to demonstrate in a piano lesson, right? But if it's a tempo, I might tell a student, go out and run something if they can, so that we can feel what is that tempo. And it's a physical manifestation of it. And that steadiness is also the key to being able to create really nice rubato, because rubato has a structure. It's not just freedom that it goes willy-nilly anywhere, right? It is freedom of tempo within structure. And so we have to have that structure built to play with tasteful rubato also. And the structure has to be here and here. Having it here is only, like on a metronome, is only good when we need just that little bit of reminder about what it is. The trouble is that if you put a metronome on and you try to play to this, like how many people here have played Guitar Hero? If you've played the game and like we're watching, it's like this synthesia videos for piano where the notes drop from the top of the screen and then the keys light up. It would be like trying to play along with a synthesia tutorial where we're using our eyes mostly and only a little bit of our ears to keep time with something. There is nothing internal about that. We're actually following something else. And so a lot of times, if only a metronome gets used and it doesn't get tied in with how to feel the pulse here when it's not present outside of our body, as soon as the metronome goes off, it's like all the hard work we did is gone, because we're relying on the device to keep time for us rather than using the device as a tool to help us learn how to keep time better. That is my opinion on a metronome. Let's see, Seth, because your thing here is related about the sense of inner pulse. You've been asked to count out loud only the beats while playing, but you can't do it without the subdivisions. Is there a good way to learn this? Oh, that's a good question, Seth. My first inclination is that it's really good to feel the subdivisions, because the subdivisions, usually I'm encouraging my students to do the opposite. They can count the big beats fine, but counting the subdivisions is where we have trouble. So personally, I would say that is more important, because the subdivisions between the beats help us tie actually the bigger beats together. If you really want to practice that, can you take something, either a piece or an exercise or something that you know really well? Has to be, I think we have to start with something that we really know how to play, because we're going to be so focused on other things, we can't think at all about what the hands are doing. So something that you know really well. Sir Woolsey, you're going to love this. Go back to some scales. Because scales, of course, are something that we know really well, right? We can do them in our sleep, hopefully. And this is just like, here's another purpose behind knowing your scales. Play a scale, count your main beats. Only count your main beats. Don't count your subdivisions. So Seth, if you can't do it with the scale, I would question how well you truly know that scale. Make it even simpler than that. Make it a chord. Let's play a chord. Even just a block triad. This is going to sound simple, but just a block triad. Start by playing and counting on the beat together. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we're linking an action with the count. And it's something very simple to execute. Now, can we make the execution eighth notes and first start with counting all of the subdivisions? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, can we do that a few times? Give the strong beats a little accent with the hand. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now we're going to keep doing that, but we're not going to count the subdivisions. 1, 2, 3, 4. The trick is, here, what you can't hear is I'm still counting the subdivision. I'm just not saying it out loud. I'm still in my mind going 1 and 2 and so on. But the word I speak is just the main beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you make them 16ths, I'm changing the tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? But here, I'm still feeling and hearing in my mind 1 E and 2 and 3 E and 4 E and. Try that. We're making something so simple to play that you don't have to think about. We're putting the hand in one spot, a nice sounding chord. I've been using D major. And we're just trying to first pair the beat with the motion, and then slowly, one piece at a time, separate the two. But it's only a verbal separation. So, Seth, I don't think this is as big of a problem as maybe your teacher is making it, and because feeling the subdivisions is so important. Where it starts to be more important to feel the large beat is when we get into playing things in cut time, or when we need to feel let's say one bar is a beat. So like, for example, in a lot of waltzes, since we were playing this earlier, successful performance of a waltz is not counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it's counting 1, 1, 1, 1. Yes? Those subdivisions are still in there. And here now the subdivisions are beat 2 and beat 3. Not even the ands, not the e and as, just the main beats, because we're trying to feel a larger sense of phrase. That's really where being able to count and switch our brain into away from, let's say, as much focus on the subdivisions and more focus on the big beat, that's really important. But there is still a part of us that's always feeling the subdivision all the time. Because without that part, it's kind of like we're gambling with time. We don't know where anything in the middle is going to happen if we don't have those subdivisions somewhere in our subconscious. Rhodsey, you said you haven't used a metronome in 1 trillion years. Rhodsey, I gave you an assignment a couple of weeks ago. Let's see, I think I missed a question. Let me go back. Tyler's question. Hello, Tyler. You said you've worked on an arrangement of Oh Holy Night that has a section of very fast consecutive triads. Tyler, are the triads, do they move or are they the same? And which hand are they in? It doesn't really matter which hand they're in. It's going to be the same practice technique, just for fun though. And how fast do they need to go? Are they Ölkönig fast, like ticka 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 ticka, or are they much more attainable? Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find that arrangement quickly at all. So, they move right hand. You said there's 16ths at about 60. Okay. Great. Oh Holy Night is very commonly in C major, so I'm going to use C major triad. Okay. Yeah, here are a couple tips for you. We're going to try to harness gravity to do a little bit of work. Let's explore that a little bit. If we hold our hand up and you freely let it bounce, I don't know if you're going to be able to completely see this, but I'm going to let it bounce on a soft surface, the bench. If you have a soft bench, not a hardwood bench, you could try this. Seth said Takadima, yeah. So we hold our hand and we let it drop. There's always a little rebound. There's always something that happens. It doesn't just go bam and plant on whatever surface we let our hand drop on, right? So there's always a little bit of rebound. And you can see it here in the wrist. I don't get to play a second pitch, but there's always this little bounce in the wrist. We want to harness that so that we use just a touch of muscle control to amplify the bounce. So you're hearing how beat 1, where we fall in, is nice and strong. Beat 2 is really a byproduct of beat 1. Now, a group of 2 is the easiest way to feel this. You can practice by linking a group of 2 together. So notice how every first one is louder, every second one is the byproduct of the first. Making this more challenging, we make a group of 3. This requires more muscle control, but we're doing the same thing. We're bouncing, using the natural bounce that occurs in the wrist and amplifying it just enough that we get 3 key strikes out of it. Okay, then we can move on to 4. 4 would be 16ths, And as I'm really showing this, you'll hear how it's not the cleanest. It's a little sloppy. Some of that fifth finger is staying too connected, but we're focused on making this as comfortable and relaxed as possible right now. And notice there's a big drop in. If I do it up higher here, big drop in, and then a release, so we can drop in again. Now, when we're going to speed this up, notice that as I continue to play these, the wrist is moving all the time, and I'm still creating one drop at various points, and the others are bounces out of that drop. This isn't going to be like an overnight success, but consistent practice and feeling how we use, it's like using residual kinetic energy, if you will. So we've put it into the key to begin with. We're just harnessing the little bit that's left, like a bouncing ball, to continue to execute 3 more fairly quick chords with little, very, very little effort. It's not, because you can see the difference immediately. Everything is clenched in the hand. Everything's pivoting from the elbow. The wrist is not moving at all. It's possible to do that, but we're going to get really tired really fast, and we're only going to be able to bump the tempo up so far. That's still 16ths at 60, so look at how flexible the wrist is through all of that. That's what we want to try and harness. At that tempo, that should be more than enough to help you through that. And as triads, if they move around as harmony changes, use a new harmony as a downbeat to make sure that we re-execute a drop into the keys. Yeah, I think that should help, Tyler. Oh, good. Good. I lost my chat for just a second. There it is. Okay. Let's see. Julio, you have a follow-up question about the Chopin prelude, which we talked about before. Cool. Let's talk about that, Julio, and then we're going to jump back. Rhodsey, if you have any questions about what we talked about with your piece. So, let me pull up the prelude. Okay. Oh, good to see you, Bethany. See, Julio, you're asking about the D grace note in measure 7, 5, 6. Okay. So how can we play it more smoothly and musically? Okay. Whoops. Okay, so this is, let's see. I think a lot of people play this as a thumb, so F sharp, in kind of a 3-note roll that comes around back to C sharp. So here we have that movement. That's what I think sounds most correct to me. That in itself makes it a lot easier to execute because we're holding the thumb as an anchor. I'll go back here. holding the thumb as an anchor and just moving the hand around in a little circle to grab the D, the grace note, to the C sharp. And the thumb continues to hold. So because they're all actually separate notes, you can practice it this way. So we're doing the same thing, just speeding it up to play it more at tempo. Yeah? Julio, I think that's going to be my answer for you. And it can be slow. You said it gets a little slow. You can add a little musical inflection there. Yeah. Also, I don't know what fingering you're using, but I'm using 1 on the bottom, 4 on the top, 3. So 4 on the D and 3 on the C sharp. Finishing the phrase on 2, and then jumping to the next. So, like the fingering in the score that I have open here is totally different. It has 5, 4, 5, 5, 4. That makes that, I think, much more challenging. Especially if you're going to try to play finger legato. Because then we have to hold 5, or hold 4 and cross 5 under. That's very awkward. So, I'll give you that fingering one more time that I like. You can see if it helps. So 5, 5, 4, 1, 4, 3. 1, 4, 3, 2. Then jump. And then the next group of chords is just about in one hand position. Okay, I hope that helps, Julio. Okay, let's jump back to Rhodsey. We're going to finish up the stream with just a little bit more talk. Rhodsey, do you have any questions about what we talked through with your Nocturne? Let's see. Julio, you said you used to follow the fingering on your score, which uses 4 and then to 5 on the grace note. Yeah, that's what mine says. I wouldn't follow that. Okay, Rhodsey, the scale part in the B section. Yes. I'm looking for your music. Here it is. By the way, while Rhodsey is writing his comment, if you haven't already, can you give the video a thumbs up? I'd appreciate it. Oh. Okay, so you say that's 100% intentional. It's meant to be a bridge of mystery to lead back to the operatic melody of D flat and back to the main melody. Okay, Rhodsey, so my comment based on that, we have 4 bars of main melody, let's say. Yeah. Yes, there are those little accents in the left hand in the next phrase. So, proportionally, Rhodsey, the bridge is extremely long. We get just as much. It feels like more because of the number of notes there are, but technically we get 4 bars of bridge and 4 bars of melody. I think those proportions are a bit off because if you truly want just like an interlude type feeling before we go back and repeat a melody, let's make that significantly shorter, like a bar or 2. 4 bars in equal length all of a sudden makes the listener feel the melody is this important and the scale is equally important. Do you really want a scale and your singable melody? I know you say you personally feel like, I hear you. When you hear it in these terms though, scale, melody, which one is more important? We have to choose the melody because a scale, not in a nocturne and not in a romantic period, a scale is not going to be a melody. A scale is going to be an ornament of some kind. It's going to be a variation. It's going to be it's not going to be melodic content, right? And when we play it, that's definitely not. So, okay, the left-hand accents, Rhodsey, those are good. Those are nice. But they don't interrupt enough the of the right hand. Right? The bars before I don't necessarily agree with the structure of the melody here, but you've spaced it really nicely. We have some nice jumping. We have some nice pauses. We have notes that we can sustain for longer. We have points of breath. Yes. And you say, and doesn't that sound romantic enough with the turn parts? So Rhodsey, I'm going to tell you a little story. Years ago, I was hired to perform a concerto for synthesizer and orchestra. It was a premiere. A good friend of mine wrote the piece. And the piece was filled with fast scales and arpeggios, basically. I used to joke with the composer that a computer would have done a better job playing it than I would have because it was supposed to be a synthesizer, so a computer-generated sound. And the purpose of most of the entire piece was an exploration of rhythmic drive. So it was interesting. It was an exploration of rhythm with some interesting colors and interesting harmonies, right? This passage, these 4 bars, remind me intensely of playing that piece. And they remind me of that because the motion is not stopping. It's never ending. It goes and it goes and it goes and it goes. There aren't any points of breath. The trouble is, the piece that you're writing is a nocturne. It is supposed to be singable, right? And it's supposed to have ebb and flow. And when we get to measure 23, it feels like we launch into a very, almost like a digital representation of music. And that to me doesn't fit at all what you have written in the previous 4 bars. which I'd still call somewhat 20th century because of the tonality used. It's not super tonal in the right hand, but it is lyrical and it is singing. And when we then link it to, if we got one bar of that turned around, I think that would be the perfect amount to balance the melody. 2 bars would be pushing it, I think. 4 bars is a lot. It's really a lot. So Rhodsey, those are my comments. Yeah. There is, I've mentioned this before, the understanding balance in composition is something that even the greatest composers alive would tell you that they struggle to get it, because it's one of the most difficult things to really comprehend, is how is balance perceived. And because the balance is what gives emotion, and it gives impetus in one direction, and it gives resolution in another, and those things in the right proportion lead to a really wonderful piece of music. And it's very easy. Proportion does not mean equal bars. It's very easy to lead the music in a way that is disproportionate, leaning too much in one direction or too much in another, and it becomes unsatisfying. And people won't necessarily, if they don't compose themselves, they won't know why it doesn't feel as good. But it's because the proportions are off usually. So you said, do you like my cadenza? Starting in 38. I think that's interesting. Yeah? It starts a little muddy for my taste. If you got rid of the rolled component of it and wrote in a cello-rondo, and maybe even eliminated the bar lines, it might feel more like a cadenza, where you're giving the performer freedom. So and I think it's just ascending minor thirds. And you might write in, you could just leave it like that. It could just be out of time, so no bar lines. Sure, 8th note beam or 16th note beam would be fine, freely written. I think that would be better than keeping this pure 8th notes the whole way. Right? So that's a small notational difference, but it makes a big difference in how we interpret what's on the page. So, yeah. Rhodsey, did you have any comments about the opening and the reharmonization of it that I talked through? Okay, so you said you need a suggestion to shorten the bridge and keep the D-flat singing melody more lengthy. If we're going to go back to that, I would say first, explore fewer massive leaps. So if we just hear the melody, that one works okay. We have one downward leap, followed by motion in the opposite direction. That is a great use of good compositional tools. Now we have massive leap, followed by massive leap. That isn't so great. So you might think about restructuring some of these leaps. like that G natural. So that was improvising a little bit on the idea that you have, where we're starting, and also I showed you one bar of like a turnaround, mostly using a scale, to lead the melody back up and around to its starting point. Yeah. So Rhodsey, see, I wanted to keep it within D flat, G flat, F sharp, and D minor. Okay, Rhodsey, what do those chords have to do with one another? How are they functionally related? If you can answer that question, the chords that you're listing, how do they function together? And I don't mean how you think they function together. I mean theory-wise. How do those chords function together? What is the definition? We have to know that. Yeah, that's why I changed things, because the function of some of them have nothing to do with the function of the subsequent chord. And when the function is disconnected, if you're not if you're not writing a tonal piece, we can disconnect function from the equation. The trouble is you establish tonality very clearly through the first bar and the second bar. And here we have 1 to 5. Yeah. So we have 2 bars, almost 3 bars, where we get a very, very clear statement. This is in the traditional key of F sharp minor. The melody is going to function that way. The harmony functions that way. As soon as you break the rule and it's no longer there, now the functional parts of harmony have little to no meaning, and the non-functional parts of harmony have little to no meaning also. We have 2 kind of disjointed ideas that we've tried to put them together. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, Rhodsey, sound nice on their own, maybe. In a way. Let's see, what was the other one? F sharp minor, G flat. Sure. There would still be, for example, in the D minor chord that we were talking about, there would be great ways of using that color, which technically is your 6th scale tone but it's mode mixture. 6 in a minor key is major. And so we have to know that we're mixing the mode in order to know how we got into it and how we get out of it, because we can't just choose a chord and say it sounds good. Yeah. So Rhodsey, you say they could all be rooted from C sharp? No, because C sharp is rooted in F sharp in this piece. The C sharp only exists because you're in F sharp. And when we're in F sharp, if we're writing a tonal piece, there are definite things that we expect to hear. And if they don't go there, it's different than, let's say, like prolonging. If we want to prolong a harmony and explore something different, it's only prolonging. It doesn't mean we completely, like, the term, like deceptive cadence, right? Think about what deceptive means. If we're deceiving the listener, we're not going to where they expect. deception in music theory usually is for a short period of time. It's not like permanent deception, because if we continue to permanently deceive and we never arrive, what we're going to feel as a listener is basically an exploration of sound. And that's probably going to be it. And it's probably not going to feel very satisfying to listen to, because we want to hear certain things. We are okay with being surprised. We're okay with being deceived only if we eventually get resolution. And eventually isn't usually like 32 bars later or 64 bars later. It's like within a few beats. And if you're really clever and a great composer, maybe 12 bars or 16 bars later. F sharp, D flat major. So Rhodsey, D flat major doesn't exist in F sharp. Just so you know, F sharp is, D flat is enharmonic, but the tonality that exists in F sharp minor is C sharp major, not D flat. They sound the same, but the function is different. Because D flat major is extremely far away from F sharp minor. C sharp major is the 5 chord. So Dith, you said, when you say clearly established tonality, what about the piece makes that the case? So Dith, I had mentioned the first couple bars of this. We get a clear F sharp minor chord to start, and then this is really, it's technically a B minor 7. Let me put the music back up. So in bar 1, F sharp minor in second inversion, followed by, this is B minor 7 in first inversion. It's not D major with a 6th tone added. It's B minor, with then a chromatic passing tone. So those 2 chords, F sharp, 1 chord, B minor 7, 4 chord. That is very clearly in F sharp. We have the 1 and the 4 and the 1. Next bar, F sharp minor, 1 chord. This is C sharp major 7, C sharp's dominant 7, C sharp major triad. That is the 5 chord. So this is all functioning within classically defined harmony. Even here, lower neighbor tone that acts like a suspension and resolution. The part that doesn't function that we talked about before is that we can't have a resolution to a chord which is also functioning as the dominant chord, because the dominant chord is a chord that's leading us somewhere else. It's not a point of return. And so this motion here in the right hand is a return, but this is a departure. And when you hear them together, it just makes both sound like dissonance without any function, because we've eliminated basically the function of the suspension, and we've eliminated the function of the 5 returning to 1. So both of those get obscured, and we're left with a note, basically a note that doesn't belong with this chord, and then a chord that doesn't belong with this note, because the function is obscured. So, Rhodsey, how did Chopin keep doing stuff using the same harmony and keep it from being repetitive? I know you like Chopin a lot, so that'd be a great place to look. How does he do it? Study his scores, intimately study his scores. Roman numeral analysis. How far away does Chopin ever go from diatonic harmony? Yeah, Rhodsey, do some. Pull out some scores. Where's the 1 chord? Where's the 5 chord? What happens in between? When Chopin uses dissonant harmony and when he uses diminished harmony, It's not all that often. And diminished harmony is some of the most dissonant stuff he ever uses. Yeah, internet privacy. So Rhodsey, the overall structure you're talking about, from C to D flat, that's totally different than how we structure the individual phrases. Navigating from C to D flat is very challenging to do well, but something that makes Chopin a great composer, right? You can learn a lot if you look at that piece and figure out what were the mechanisms he used to do that. That's going to be, it's going to show you so much about what it takes to write a really successful passage and a really successful modulation, at least in that particular way. Dith, think about, so close versus far. Let's see. Basically, close keys are going to be our relative major and minor. Those are going to be very close keys. Next close keys are going to be one key around the circle of fifths in one direction or the other direction. So that is why F sharp and C sharp go together well. Here's the problem. Here's why C sharp and D flat, they're very different. In order to get to C sharp, yes, we start here, start down an octave, sharps go up. Now we get to C sharp. So from C, it's all the way around the other side of the circle of fifths. To get to D flat, we start at C, we go down. They are, C sharp and D flat, while being parallel keys, are as far apart as you could possibly get. So yes, they are enharmonically the same note, but how things function to bridge the gap from one to the other, they're very far apart. Rhodsey, no, it's your piece. I'm just, my job here is to be helpful. So I'm pointing out, if we were in a private lesson, I'm just pointing out all the things that would be your assignment to fix. And probably, I mean, we wouldn't, if you were my student, we wouldn't be working through an entire piece without any feedback in the meantime. You know, you would write 8 to 16 bars and we'd review them together and talk about them before structures get too developed. Because, yeah, you're right. How you change the first 8 bars should dramatically change how the entire rest of the piece functions. Yeah. And internet, you say, generally you cannot improve Chopin. I'd agree with that, which is why he's so great to study. Compositionally too. Compositionally and performance. And any of the great composers. So yeah, Rhodsey, what you just said, get a theory textbook or go online and look up tonal harmony. I've mentioned this before. You gotta know your 7 diatonic chords. You have to know that first before we can start exploring when we leave diatonic, meaning within the scale. When we leave the scale, we have to know why we're doing it. And if we're constructing something without a scale to begin with, which is how a lot more modern classical composition works, it is tonal adjacent, or it's more of just an exploration of color or texture. There is still a defined parameter within which the music works. So some composers will redefine harmony with different building blocks. Instead of being thirds that build triads, they might be fourths that make chordal harmony. And you'll hear something like that. But then we stick with the harmonic language that is established at the beginning of the piece. Internet, I think I like what you just said. Arrangers and composers resolve dissonance creatively. Yeah. So it doesn't always have to, resolution doesn't always have to be immediate, and it doesn't always have to be where we expect it to be. But it does need to give the feeling that it's a resolution. So, yes. Like, for example, in these chords that we're talking about, this dissonance, that's resolution. If you want to reharmonize that to not resolve to F sharp, the simplest thing is think of, well, what common tones does F sharp share with other chords? So we could have D major or B minor. If we use the flat major 2 chord, so here, that would be like a direct modulation to another key. But behind all of those thoughts, there's a reason why I'm choosing that harmony, right? So I'm looking for common tone and what is the purpose. Do I want this to be a resolution that leads to a sense of closure? In that case, we resolve to the 1 chord in the key we're in. Do I want it to be a resolution that resolves to a new forward motion? We can go somewhere completely different. And this leads us in a whole new direction. Where the melody and harmony is going to be inspired from that resolution is totally different than that one. Same thing. That's going to lead us in a different place. It's a little more resolved than D major. It's not as resolved as F sharp. But we still feel like emotionally we have rounded a corner and we've put a period at the end of the sentence, right? Yeah, Rhodsey, think about that. I may have mentioned this before, but a great musical composition is also going to give us the same devices we have in literature. When you read, we have commas, colons, semicolons, periods, ellipses. They all mean different things as we read words, right? And they all give a different interpretation of what we're reading. They give a different inflection. And we need to have those things in music as well. The ends, periods, right? The ends of phrases are called points of cadence in music. We have a lot of tools to create that point of cadence. So, okay, I think we're going to wrap it up today. Rhodsey, I'm glad you were able to tune back in and for us to talk through some of this stuff. I really like the allegro. I really like a lot of the first statement of the melody you wrote. And I think if I were to sum up kind of what happens in the A section, I think you're trying too hard to write something unique or to write something with harmonic interest. And I think you're trying so hard to do that we're losing sight of what makes music fun to listen to begin with. Because your main melody is already really well composed. It's very nice. And if we can shape it in a way, if we can underpin it in a way with harmony that highlights the melodic shape instead of working against it, I think you'll be on a really good path. Rhodsey, yeah, you can do whatever you'd like. But for your next piece that you work on, no, just remember the comments I gave you because I think they're good. Okay. Let's call it a day, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for being here. If you're still here and you haven't given the video a thumbs up, please give the video a thumbs up. We're going to do another one of these in 2 weeks. I will look forward to seeing many of you here. Does having Julio, last question, Julio said, does having raised sevenths automatically mean the piece is written in a minor key? The raised seventh is the leading tone in a minor key. You have to have the leading tone in order to have dominant function harmony. If you don't have the leading tone, you don't have any dominant function harmony, and we lose all of that really big pull back home. Leading tone exists naturally in a major key. It does not exist naturally in a minor key, hence why in minor keys we have natural minor scale, harmonic minor scale, which includes the leading tone, and the melodic minor, which is something totally different that we're not going to talk about today. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Rhodsey. Jel Zorov, thanks for being here. Welcome. Rob Harrington, thanks for being here also. Glad you guys could all stick around for so long. All right, practice smarter, not harder. See you in 2 weeks or in the next video. All right, take care, everybody.